Commander Vexthel of the Corvani Empire sat rigidly in the metallic interrogation chamber, his 6 eyes darting nervously between the recording devices. The harsh fluorescent lights cast eerie shadows across his scarred exoskeleton. Military uniform, decorated with medals of honor and service ribbons, now bore the weight of countless battles. Burn marks from plasma fire dotted the fabric, and his ceremonial shoulder plates showed deep gouges from human projectile weapons. His mandibles clicked anxiously as he prepared to speak, a sound that echoed through the sterile chamber like chattering teeth. The tribunal members, 3 high-ranking Corvani officials, watched him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. They had never seen their most decorated war hero in such a state. "Begin recording," announced the tribunal leader, his voice cold and mechanical. The recording devices whirred to life, their red lights blinking like tiny stars in the dim room. "State your designation and service record for the archives." Vextel's throat sacs inflated slightly before he spoke. "Commander Vextel, 3rd. Corvani Fleet, serial designation KX-7749. Veteran of the Human Corvani War. Survivor of 17 major engagements. Former commander of the battlecruiser Void's Edge." His voice carried the gravelly tone characteristic of his species, but underneath lay something else entirely. Something that made the tribunal members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Fear. The war had ended 3 cycles ago, but the nightmares persisted. Every sleep period brought visions of human faces, their strange expressions of determination, even in death. The Corvani High Command needed answers. Their technologically superior forces, their advanced weaponry, their centuries of military doctrine had all failed against what their initial reports described as primitive bipedal creatures. They needed to understand what went wrong. "Your psychological evaluation indicates severe combat stress syndrome," the 2nd tribunal member noted, consulting his datapad. "You've refused treatment and requested this testimony instead." "Why?" Vexthel's claws scraped against the polished metal table, leaving thin scratches in the surface. "Because others need to know. Future commanders, future soldiers, they need to understand what we faced out there." The chamber's environmental systems hummed quietly, maintaining the perfect temperature and atmosphere for Corvani physiology. But Vextel felt cold, despite the warmth. He had felt cold ever since the war ended. "Tell us about your first encounter." With human forces, the tribunal leader pressed. Leaning forward with interest, Vextel closed 4 of his 6 eyes, as if trying to block out painful memories. "It was on the mining world of Kepler 7, in the Outer Rim territories. Standard conquest protocol. We expected easy victory within planetary rotations. The humans had inferior weapons, slower ships, weaker bodies, compared to our physiology. Intelligence reports suggested they would surrender upon seeing our superior numbers and technology." He paused, his breathing becoming labored. The respiratory slits along his neck fluttered rapidly, a sign of extreme distress. "Our fleet consisted of 12 battlecruisers, 40 destroyer-class vessels, and over 200 fighter craft. Human defense consisted of outdated orbital platforms and maybe 50 primitive spacecraft. On paper, it should have been a massacre in our favor." The tribunal members exchanged glances. They had read the battle reports, but hearing it from Vexthel himself painted a different picture. "The human commander sent us a transmission before the battle began," Vextel continued, his voice growing distant. "A simple message that our translators initially dismissed as primitive bravado. The human said his name was Captain Wu Jin, of the Terran Defense Corps. He told us to leave immediately or face the consequences." One of the tribunal members actually chuckled. A single human captain threatening an entire Corvani battle fleet. "We laughed too," Vextel said, his mandibles clicking in what might have been bitter amusement. "Our entire bridge crew found it entertaining. Here was this small, fragile creature, threatening beings twice his size, with weapons that could level mountains. We decided to make an example of them, to show other human colonies what resistance would cost them." The recording devices continued their steady humming, capturing every word that would later be studied by military strategists across the Corvani Empire. "We were catastrophically wrong," Vextel whispered, his voice barely audible. Those humans didn't just fight us. They fought like they were defending something sacred, something worth more than their own lives. They turned every asteroid, every piece of space debris, every disabled ship into a weapon. When their main defense platform was crippled, they rammed it into our flagship. When their fighters ran out of ammunition, they used their ships as guided missiles. His claws dug deeper into the table, leaving permanent marks. Captain Woojin was the last to die. His ship was burning, life support failing, but he kept broadcasting tactical information to the remaining human forces. He could have ejected, could have saved himself, but he stayed at his post until the very end. His final transmission was not a plea for mercy or a surrender. It was a promise that humanity would never stop fighting for their freedom. The chamber fell silent except for the mechanical worry of recording equipment, capturing what would become the most disturbing: military testimony and Corvani history. The attack on mining station Deltanine was supposed to be routine. Vextel continued, his voice growing distant as he stared at the wall behind the tribunal. Standard planetary occupation protocol. My strike force of 400 elite Corvani warriors against a human garrison of maybe 50 defenders. We had plasma cannons that could melt through titanium, personal energy shields that deflected most projectile weapons, and tactical superiority in every measurable way. The commander's mandibles clicked rapidly, creating a sound like chattering. Metal in the quiet chamber. Among his species, this was a clear sign of extreme distress. Our intelligence briefings made it sound like a training exercise. The mining station was isolated, cut off from reinforcements, with minimal defensive capabilities. We expected to be back on our mothership within hours, filing another routine conquest report. He paused, his 6 eyes focusing on different points. In the room, as if seeing ghosts, the human commander was named Deho. Just Deho. No fancy titles like Supreme Commander or War Master that we Corvain use. No ceremonial armor or elaborate weaponry. He wore standard combat fatigues that looked like they had seen better days. He carried a primitive projectile weapon that our tech analysts said should have been obsolete centuries ago. The tribunal leader leaned forward with interest. Reports indicated the humans had access to more advanced weaponry. Why was their commander using primitive equipment? Vexthel's breathing became shallow. He thought it was desperation. We thought they were so poorly equipped that their leader had to use ancient weapons. We were wrong about that too. Geho chose that weapon for a reason. It was reliable, simple, and deadly in the right hands. And his hands were very, very right. Happened during the initial assault? The tribunal member pressed, his stylus hovering over his datapad.
Our droppers
Descended through the thin atmosphere like falling stars. The station's automated defenses were pathetic by our standards. A few outdated missile batteries and some energy weapons that could barely scratch our ship hulls. We expected the humans to surrender once they saw our superior firepower. Instead, they went silent. Complete radio silence. Vextel's claws scraped against the table as he continued. The moment our dropships touched down on the landing platforms, they opened fire from every conceivable position. Not just from the obvious defensive positions, but from maintenance shafts, storage compartments, even from inside the ventilation systems. Deho had turned that entire station into a maze of death. The chamber's atmospheric processors hummed quietly as Vextel gathered his thoughts. His next words came slowly, as if each one caused him physical pain. The first wave of my warriors advanced through the main corridor, confident in their energy shields and superior armor. That's when we discovered the explosive charges hidden in the ventilation systems. Not sophisticated military explosives, but improvised devices made from mining equipment. The humans had turned their own tools into weapons. One of the tribunal members looked up from his notes. Mining equipment? How effective could such primitive devices be? Effective enough to collapse 3 sections of the station and trap half my advanced team? Vextel replied grimly. But that was just the beginning. The corridors became kill zones. Every corner, every doorway, every blind spot had been prepared. The humans had studied our tactics, our movement patterns, our weaknesses. They knew exactly where we would go and how we would attack. Vextel's voice became barely a whisper. But it wasn't the traps that broke us. It wasn't the clever tactics or the improvised weapons. It was watching them fight with a fury that defied all logic. There was a human named Hyanwu, a maintenance worker according to our intelligence. He was defending a storage room that contained nothing but spare parts and emergency supplies. The commander's entire body began to shake as he relived the memory. Hyanwu took a plasma blast to his left arm. The energy completely severed the limb, and he should have gone into shock immediately. Instead, he used his own flowing blood to blind one of my soldiers. While my warrior was stumbling around, unable to see, Hyanwu grabbed a thermal detonator with his remaining hand. A thermal detonator? The tribunal leader's voice carried a note of disbelief. Those devices are designed to demolish rock formations. The explosion would have killed him instantly. Yeah, you knew that, Vextel said, his voice cracking. He looked directly at my soldier, at the other warriors rushing to help, and he smiled. Actually smiled. Then he detonated the device. The explosion took out 3 of my best warriors, elite soldiers who had served for decades. Hyanwu died in the blast, but he made sure his death meant something. The recording devices captured every word as Vextel continued his haunting testimony. That scene repeated itself throughout the station. Humans fighting with wounds that should have incapacitated them, using their own bodies as weapons when they ran out of ammunition. A human engineer named Bioram barricaded himself in the reactor control room. When my forces finally breached the door, we found him dead at his console. He had overloaded the main power core before dying, taking out our entire assault team's electronic equipment. The chamber fell silent, except for the mechanical worry of recording equipment and the soft hum of life support systems. The final assault took 18 hours, Vextel concluded, his voice hollow. We lost 200 soldiers taking that station. Elite warriors, the pride of the Corvani military, reduced to casualties by a handful of human miners and maintenance workers. The humans lost all 50 defenders, but they made every single death count for something. He looked directly at the tribunal members, his 6 eyes reflecting the chamber's harsh lighting. They weren't just defending a mining facility. They were defending their right to exist, their freedom, their future. They fought like they were protecting something sacred, something worth more than life itself. And that's something we Corvani have never truly understood. The second encounter was worse, Vextel whispered, his voice barely audible in the sterile chamber. His mandibles had stopped their nervous clicking, replaced by an eerie stillness that somehow seemed more disturbing. Crimson Station, our most heavily fortified prison facility in the Outer Rim. It was built into an asteroid, completely self-contained, holding 30 human prisoners we had captured during previous raids. The tribunal members leaned forward, their datapads forgotten, as they listened to their most decorated commander describe what should have been an impossible scenario. My garrison consisted of 800 elite troops, the best soldiers the Corvani Empire could deploy. We had automated defense turrets every 50 meters, motion sensors in every corridor, and orbital support from 2 destroyer-class warships. The facility was designed to be impenetrable. Our architects boasted that not even a Corvani assault force could breach those defenses. Vextel's claws traced patterns on the metal table as he continued. The prison was carved deep into solid rock, with only one main entrance and emergency exits that were sealed with blast doors thick enough to withstand nuclear explosions. Every prisoner was held in individual cells with force field barriers. The entire facility was a monument to Corvani military engineering. He paused, his breathing becoming irregular. Then 8 humans arrived. 8. One tribunal member looked up from his notes in disbelief. 8 humans against 800 Corvani soldiers and automated defenses. Led by a female named Minesio, Vextel continued, ignoring the interruption. She was small, even by human standards. Maybe half the size of an average Corvani warrior. When our external sensors first detected their approach ship, we almost dismissed it as a supply transport. It was old, battered, held together with what looked like spare parts and determination. The commander's voice grew distant as he relived the memory. But her eyes. When we captured footage of her during the infiltration, I saw her eyes. They burned with something we Corvani don't understand. It's not just anger or hatred, but something deeper. Something that made my veteran soldiers step back when they looked at the recordings. How did such a small force even approach your facility undetected? The tribunal leader asked. They didn't try to stay hidden, Vextel replied with bitter admiration. Their ship transmitted fake distress signals claiming to be a damaged medical transport carrying wounded civilians. Standard protocol required us to investigate. When our security team boarded their vessel, they found exactly what they expected. Medical equipment, wounded humans on stretchers, desperate-looking crew members. He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was all fake. The wounded humans were Menesio's team in disguise. The medical equipment had been modified into weapons and hacking devices. By the time our security team realized the deception, it was too late. What happened to your boarding party? Neutralized within minutes, Vexel said simply. Not killed, but knocked unconscious and stripped of their equipment. Menesio's team used our own security uniforms and access codes to enter the station. They walked through our main checkpoint like they belonged there. The recording devices hummed steadily as Vextel continued his testimony. They didn't just breach our defenses, they turned our own security systems against us. A human tech specialist named Jin Wu somehow convinced our automated defense network to create blind spots in the surveillance grid.
Ow!
Our own computers were helping them hide. One of the tribunal members shook his head in confusion. How is that possible? Our security protocols were designed by the finest military programmers in the Empire. Jinwu didn't break our codes, Vextel explained. Convinced the artificial intelligence that he was conducting a security drill authorized by High Command. The AI created the blind spots to test our response capabilities. By the time we realized what was happening, they were already inside the prison block. The commander's 6 eyes closed simultaneously as he recalled the next part of the assault. Another human, Sang-Ho, took out an entire guard tower using nothing but explosive charges made from medical supplies. He turned basic first aid equipment into demolition devices. Our guards never saw it coming. But the most terrifying part was watching Menesio herself in action. She moved through our corridors like death personified. When my Lieutenant Corvex confronted her in the main security hub, I watched the entire fight through our surveillance cameras. Vextel's voice became strained. Vex was one of our finest warriors. 2 meters tall, armed with the latest plasma weaponry, wearing full combat armor. Menesio had a simple projectile pistol and a combat knife. The fight should have lasted seconds. What happened? She fought with a fury that defied physics. Corvex landed several hits. I saw the impacts, saw her bleed.
Any rational being would have retreated or collapsed from the wounds.
Instead, she kept advancing. When her weapon ran out of ammunition, she broke off a piece of metal debris from a damaged wall panel and used it like a sword. The chamber's environmental system seemed to grow louder in the silence that followed. She killed Corvex with that broken piece of metal, stabbed it through a gap in his armor that shouldn't have existed. She had studied our equipment, found our weaknesses, turned our own technology against us. Did they succeed in their rescue mission? Vextel nodded slowly. They extracted all 30 prisoners and recovered 6 human bodies from previous battles. They wouldn't leave their dead behind. Even under fire, even while fighting for their lives, Menesio carried a wounded human named Taijin on her back. She never slowed down, never stopped fighting. By the time my full garrison responded, they had reached the landing pad where their ship waited. We surrounded them with overwhelming force. 200 soldiers, heavy weapons, no possible escape. Root. The commander's voice cracked as he reached the climax of his story. They formed a defensive circle around their wounded and their dead. They could have surrendered. Any rational military force would have negotiated. Instead, a human named Dong Han volunteered for what they called the final option. He infiltrated our ammunition depot during the confusion. He didn't even know he was there until he activated the explosive charges throughout the entire facility. The explosion was visible. From orbit, it took out half the station and gave his team the distraction they needed to escape. Vextel looked directly at the tribunal members. Dong Han smiled when he pressed the detonator. Through our security feeds, I saw him smile. Knew he was about to die, knew his sacrifice would save his comrades, and he was genuinely happy. About it, that image haunts my sleep cycles every single night. The final battle was on the industrial world of Nix 7. Bextel continued, his entire body now trembling like a leaf in a storm. The scars across his exoskeleton seemed to pulse with remembered pain as he spoke. It was supposed to be the end of human resistance in that sector. We had cornered the last remaining fighters in the ruins of New Sol, the planet's capital city. The tribunal members watched in fascination as their most experienced commander struggled to maintain his composure. Bextel had led campaigns across dozens of worlds, but nothing had prepared him for what he witnessed on Nix 7. The city had been bombed for weeks. Our orbital bombardment had reduced most of the buildings to rubble and twisted metal. The humans had maybe 200 fighters left against my full army of 5,000. They had no escape routes, no reinforcements coming, and no realistic hope of survival. Our intelligence confirmed that their communication arrays were destroyed. Their supply lines cut, their leadership scattered. Vexel's voice grew quieter, forcing the tribunal to lean forward to hear him. I sent them a final surrender ultimatum through emergency broadcast channels. Standard procedure: lay down your weapons, submit to Corvani authority, and face imprisonment instead of death. We gave them 12 hours to decide. Did they respond? Asked the tribunal leader. Oh, they responded, Vextel said with a bitter laugh, but not the way we expected. Instead of surrender, they launched a counterattack at dawn. The chamber's lighting seemed to dim as Vextel recalled the most horrific day of his military career. The assault was led by a human commander named Jun-Ho. According to our captured intelligence files, he had been a factory supervisor before the war. Not a professional soldier, not a military academy graduate, just an ordinary citizen who became extraordinary when his world needed him. How could 200 fighters mount any meaningful attack against 5,000 troops? Jun-Ho split his forces into dozens of small units and hit us simultaneously across the entire city. While one team created a massive diversion by attacking our supply depot, another team infiltrated our communications hub. A third team targeted our medical facilities, knowing we would have to respond to protect our wounded. Vextel's claws scraped against the metal table, leaving deep gouges in the surface as he continued. But the main assault was aimed directly at our command center. Jun-Ho led that attack personally, with barely 30 fighters against our most heavily defended position. It should have been suicide. The commander paused, his breathing becoming labored as he relived the memory. I was in the command bunker, watching the battle unfold through multiple screens. Our automated defenses were working perfectly. Energy barriers, plasma turrets, robotic sentries, everything functioned exactly as designed, but the humans kept coming. What made them so effective against superior technology? They turned our own tactics against us, Vexel explained. We had studied their military history, learned their strategies from previous battles. What we didn't understand was their ability to adapt and improvise under impossible circumstances. Jun-Ho used our own defensive positions as cover, turning our fortifications into weapons. The recording devices hummed steadily as Vextel described the most haunting moments of the battle. I watched a human medic named Hai Jin continue treating wounded soldiers while plasma fire rained down around her position. She had taken 3 direct hits from our energy weapons, wounds that would have killed most beings instantly. But she kept working. His voice began to crack with emotion. When a human warrior named Wanshik was brought to her with severe injuries, she used her own body to shield him while performing emergency surgery with nothing but battlefield medical tools. She operated on him for over an hour, while under constant fire, using her own blood supply to keep him alive. One of the tribunal members looked up from his notes with confusion. Her own blood supply? That's medically impossible. Humans can donate blood to each other during emergencies, Vextel explained. She connected her circulatory system directly to his using improvised tubing. She literally kept him alive with her own life force while repairing his damaged organs. I had never seen anything like it in 30 years of warfare. Commander's voice dropped to barely a whisper. But the moment that broke my spirit completely involved a human engineer named Kyunsu. He infiltrated our primary power core facility during the chaos of battle. Our security cameras tracked his movements through the maintenance tunnels. How did he bypass your security measures? He didn't bypass them. He triggered them deliberately. Every security protocol, every defensive measure, every automated response. He wanted us to know he was there. When my security team reached the power core chamber, they found him standing at the main control console. Vextal S6 eyes closed as he recalled the final moments. Kung Su could have simply sabotaged the system and escaped through the same tunnels he used to enter. Instead, he chose to manually overload the entire power grid. The explosion would be massive enough to take out our entire command structure, but he would have to stay behind to complete the process. He sacrificed himself? More than that, Vextal said, his voice breaking completely. When he saw me watching through the security feed, he looked directly into the camera. This human engineer, this ordinary person who had become something extraordinary, stood at attention and gave me a perfect military salute. Then he smiled and activated the overload sequence. The chamber fell silent, except for the mechanical sounds of recording equipment and life support systems. When Vextal spoke again, his words came slowly, as if each one caused him physical pain. The explosion took out our entire command network and killed over 800 of my soldiers instantly. But that wasn't the end. The power failure triggered secondary explosions throughout our equipment depot. Our own weapons turned against us as ammunition stores detonated in chain reactions. How many Corvani casualties did you suffer in that final battle? It's over 2,000 dead, with hundreds more wounded so severely they were never fit for service again. Every human who died took at least 10 of my warriors with them. Not through superior weapons or advanced tactics, but through pure, incomprehensible determination to protect something greater than themselves. Vextal looked directly at each tribunal member in turn. That's when I understood the truth about humans. They don't fight for conquest or glory or even survival. They fight for each other, for their families, for abstract concepts like freedom and dignity that most species can't even define properly. And that kind of enemy, one who fights for ideals instead of territory, can never truly be defeated. War ended not because we defeated them, but because we could no longer bear to fight them, Vextal concluded, his voice hollow and empty like an echo in a vast cavern. The fluorescent lights above seemed to flicker as he spoke, casting dancing shadows across his scarred face. The High Command sued for peace after Nick 7, not because of military losses, but because our soldiers were refusing to fight. The tribunal members exchanged nervous glances. This was information that had never appeared in any official reports. Their entire understanding of how the war ended was being rewritten by their most decorated commander. Refusing to fight? The tribunal leader's voice carried a note of disbelief. Corvani warriors have never shown cowardice in battle.
It wasn't cowardice, Vextal replied firmly.
It was something far more dangerous to military morale. Our soldiers had begun to respect the humans. Fear them, yes, but also respect them in ways that made continuing the war impossible. He gestured to the deep scars across his exoskeleton. Our entire military doctrine was built on rational self-preservation. We fight to win territory, to gain resources, to expand our empire. When casualties become too high, we retreat.
Ow.
When victory becomes impossible, we negotiate. It's logical, efficient, and has served us well for centuries. The commander's mandibles clicked slowly as he continued. But humans don't operate on our logic. We couldn't comprehend an enemy that valued abstract concepts like honor and loyalty over basic survival. Every battle became a psychological warfare nightmare where our own soldiers questioned why they were fighting. What specific incident changed everything? Asked one of the tribunal members. Vextal's entire body seemed to shrink as he recalled his most haunting memory. After the Battle of Nick 7, I was inspecting the medical facilities where we treated both Corvani and human casualties. Standard protocol requires us to provide basic medical care to enemy wounded. It's part of galactic warfare conventions. His voice became barely audible. I found their medic, Hyjin, in one of our emergency treatment rooms. She was dying from multiple plasma wounds, connected to life support systems that were keeping her alive just long enough for questioning. But she wasn't alone. The recording devices hummed quietly as they captured every word of what would become legendary testimony. Throughout the Corvani Empire, she was holding the hand of a wounded Corvani soldier, one of my own troops who had been injured in the same battle. Private Zekmar had lost both his primary arms and was facing permanent disability. Our medical staff had treated his wounds, but there's only so much you can do for that kind of trauma. Vexthal's claws traced patterns on the table as he continued. Hyjin was using her remaining strength to comfort Zekmar, speaking to him in broken Corvani that she must have learned from prisoners or battlefield communications. She was telling him that his injuries didn't define his worth, that he would find new purpose beyond warfare. An enemy medic was comforting one of our soldiers. The human named Wunshik, another wounded prisoner in the same room, asked her the same question in our language. He wanted to know why she was wasting her final moments on an enemy warrior who had been trying to kill her people just hours before. Vexthal's mandibles clicked in what might have been the equivalent of sobbing. Her answer changed everything for me. She looked at Wunshik with eyes that were already starting to cloud over from blood loss. She said something that echoes in my mind. Every single day, the chamber fell completely silent, except for the mechanical sounds of life support and recording equipment. She said because suffering is suffering, regardless of species. Pain doesn't care about politics or territory or empire. When someone is hurting, you help them. That's what makes us human. Vexel's voice cracked completely. Those were. Among her last words, she died holding the hand of an enemy soldier, giving comfort instead of seeking revenge. One of the tribunal members shifted uncomfortably in his seat. How did this affect your troops? Spread through the entire garrison within hours. Soldiers who had fought humans began sharing similar stories. An enemy who would shield our wounded with their own bodies during artillery strikes. Human prisoners who shared their meager food rations with captured Corvani soldiers. Humans who would risk their own lives to pull our wounded from burning vehicles. Vexthal stood slowly, his movements showing the weight of years of psychological trauma. The humans never left their dead behind, no matter how dangerous the retrieval mission. They never abandoned their wounded, even when carrying them meant certain death. They fought for ideals that we can't even translate properly into our language, because we don't have equivalent concepts. What do you mean? They have words like sacrifice and selflessness that don't exist in Corvani. We fight for personal glory, for promotion, for material rewards. Humans fight for abstract principles that can't be measured or quantified. They turned every battle into something sacred, something worth dying for. The commander moved toward the chamber door, his scarred body, telling the story of countless encounters with human determination. In all our military planning, all our strategic calculations, we never accounted for an enemy that would choose death over dishonor. We never understood that some beings would rather face impossible odds than compromise their principles. Does this change our military doctrine going forward? Vextal paused at the threshold, his 6 eyes reflecting the harsh chamber lighting. That's why we lost. Not tactically. We won most individual battles. But strategically, spiritually, we were defeated by something we couldn't measure, couldn't counter, couldn't comprehend. The humans didn't just fight with weapons and tactics. They fought with their souls. Our greatest mistake was treating this as a conventional war. We brought superior technology, better weapons, more soldiers. But humans brought something that rendered all of that irrelevant, an unshakable belief that some things are worth more than life itself. The tribunal members sat in stunned silence as Vexel delivered his final warning. Future generations must understand this truth. Humans are not dangerous. Because of their technology, or their numbers, or their tactical abilities, they're dangerous because they possess something that makes them willing to sacrifice everything for what they believe is right. He stepped through the doorway, then turned back one final time. And that kind of enemy, one who fights not for conquest, but for conviction, not for territory, but for truth, that kind of enemy can never truly be defeated. You can kill their bodies, Destroy their cities, conquer their worlds. Kill an idea, and you cannot conquer a spirit that refuses to surrender. The recording device is powered down with a soft electronic whine as the chamber fell into stunned silence. The tribunal members sat motionless, left to contemplate the implications of what they had just heard. Their understanding of warfare, of victory and defeat, of what it meant to be a warrior, had been fundamentally changed by the testimony of their most experienced commander. Outside the chamber, Vextel walked slowly down the corridor, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The war was over. Peace had been declared. But the lessons learned from humanity would haunt the Corvain Empire for generations to come. The end.